It's now my pleasure to introduce today's second speaker, Professor Ann Buttimer. She's certainly one of the most prominent geographers that actually influenced my generation and many generations after with her thinking, her writing, and her teaching. Ann Buttimer is Emeritus Professor of Geography at the University College Dublin since 2003, and she's Fellow of several geographical and scientific societies in many countries, too many to mention them all here. But she has also a close relation to the IGU. From 2000 to 2004, she was president of the International Geographical Union, the first female geographer to be elected to this position. But she's also held many other important positions in her long academic career. For instance, she served as a council member of the Association of American Geographers, the AAG, in the 1970s, and of the Royal Geographical Society from 1996 to 1999. Ann Buttimer graduated from the University College Cork in the early 1960s. She received her PhD in geography at the University of Washington in Seattle, US, in 1965, and since then held many different research and teaching positions in Belgium, Canada, France, Scotland, Sweden, Ireland, and the US. As most of you know, she has authored many influential books and articles on subjects ranging from social space and urban planning to history of ideas and environmental policy. Some of her work has been published in many languages, including French, Japanese, Russian, Spanish, and also German. Her academic interests include the history and philosophy of science, urban and social geography, migration and identity, the relation between nature and society and culture, sustainable development, and the human dimensions of global change. In her long career, she has received many distinguished awards worldwide. For instance, she was honored with the title of Doctor Honoris Causa in the University of Joensuu in Finland in 1999, of Tartu University in Estonia in 2004, and quite recently at the University of Grenoble in France in 2012. In 2009, she also received the gold medal of the King of Sweden, from the King of Sweden. And we are greatly honored to have you here to present the second keynote lecture of today. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ann Buttimer. She will talk to us on diverse perspectives on society and environment, retrospect and prospect.
Good day. It is delightful to be here in Cologne. This is a city that I visited a few times, but I'm especially happy to be here because of the great Albert and his associates, Meister Eckhart, the Rhineland mystics, all these wonderful counterpoint voices that really confronted orthodoxies of the day that had tended to become somewhat monopolistic. I'm going to speak about ideas, about society and environment, and emphasize particularly the value of the counterpoint voices. I'm going to speak about my favorite subject, this great orchestra of life that Meister Eckhart particularly celebrated. I'm looking at society and environment and claim that there is no possible description of humanity without concern about environment. Humanus, from humus, comes as in all the Indo-European languages as an earth dweller. We see it, we read the interactions through landscape picture sometimes, but basically we say this relationship between society and environment varies dramatically around the world. I'm going to speak mainly of the Western tradition, but you see that in some cases, such as in China, 6th century, each society tends to see itself as center of the world, and increasing barbarism out from there. But this is a 6th century Chinese image of society and environment, with the 4 cardinal directions associated with the 4 basic elements, 4 human emotions, okay, and then the great yin and yang. In the West, we did have a Heraclitean tradition of seeing universe and humanity combined, the 4 basic elements in human body and in nature, and then with Heraclitus, the unifying force is human love, and the dividing force, the separating force, is human hate. Now come the Socratics, and they stripped this of its dynamism, and the Socratic theory of humors eliminates the human emotion part. Another big difference between the pre-Socratic and the Socratic was that for the pre-Socratics, the physical and the intellectual were one. Nous, knowledge, consciousness, was part of physis. Now, the Socratics separated that. They separated thought and being, truth and goodness. And that separation has come down the centuries, affecting all of our thinking. The distinction became a separation. But then came some counterpoint voices, very important. Leonardo, for example, and our own Hildegard. Okay? Again, re-establishing the fact that you must consider human experience and universal experience simultaneously. Now, down the centuries, we've all emphasized that there is the intellectual, nous, and physis, and in between, the lived landscape. Now, if you look at this one, you have an idealist tradition, ecological tradition. If you look at it this way, you have an environmental deterministic. Now, the big difference in the 20th century was that nous and physis were eliminated, and we concentrated on what you could call the spatial tradition exclusively. Environment became a kind of tabula rasa, where processes unfolded. And there was no talk about history and no talk about environment. But again, we had some counterpoint voices. This, I think, is one of the more important ones. Many of us in my generation will recognize. For example, the opening lecture, the opening essay on transformations, the great turning points in the history of humankind, and the chains of transformations from fear and longing for security, growing self-confidence, aggressiveness and conquest, responsibility and unification. What this did was to evoke the question of humanity and environment. It evoked great interest in the evolution of livelihoods, whether they were independent invention or whether they were a product of diffusion. And the other great input of the 60s, counterpoint voice, was Rachel Carson, I think probably read by most people here. But the one text that reintroduced history, the whole idea of evolution over time, was Clarence Glacken's Traces on the Rhodian Shore. He went back to classical ideas of ideas, society, and nature, and showed the various conceptions that dominated from classical times to the 18th century. This was an incredibly important counterpoint voice. From both of them came this conviction that you should look at ways of life. Okay? Here is the structure of geographic inquiry, and genre de vie, thanks to the wonderful French tradition. And associated with the nous, or the knowledge level, were questions of societal identity. Related to the landscape and functional space was order, spatial, socio-spatial order, and with the biophysical niche. So these are my 3 societal interests, and I'll come back to those in a little while. Yes, thanks to La Géographie Humaine, I think genre de vie is probably one of the more integrative conceptions that geography has cultivated. Final development in the 60s was the traditional view, questioning the traditional view of science, that the methods, the filters of science between the observer and the thing observed would guarantee objectivity. Well, then came phenomenology and a few others, and so this questioned the ripple between the viewer and the thing viewed, and the necessity to put in parentheses, as it were, the preconceptions the scientist brought to the object of study. The 60s also ended with great concern about functional specialization. The fact that the Earth was being looked at from so many very, very one-eyed, blinkered specialists, and what to do about this business of integrating insight from the various specialized fields. This was a project on which I spent about 12 years together with Torsten Hägerstrand in Sweden. And we interviewed a couple of hundred people about their career experiences to see if we could find some common denominators among specialists of various fields. One of the areas that we came across was worldview. Worldviews that could be shared by physical scientists, human scientists, and so on. And I'm going to talk about these four, what I call root metaphors, to see the world as, see the world as, as an organic whole. It's something that could be found among historians, theologians, physicists, and geographers. It's an integrated worldview. Then there's a mosaic worldview, that is the atlas view of the world, shared by people in various disciplines. The world as a mechanical system, or the world as an arena of spontaneous events. Now, the nice thing about this is that each of these worldviews is anchored on a particular theory of truth, a different theory of truth. So, organicism emphasizes coherence. It sees the processes in the world as dialectical and unifying. Formism, or the mosaic view, has a correspondence theory of truth. You know, getting ways to represent what's on the ground. And they see everything, the processes in the world are patterning. Mechanism has a causal theory of truth, functional, mechanistic relationships, and contextualism, the arena point of view, has an operational theory of truth. Let me give you an example of some of these. And so all four were probably simultaneously co-present throughout the 20th century, but one would tend to dominate over the others at each period. So you had organicism in the early part of the century, replaced by mosaic in the 30s and so on, mechanism after World War II, and certainly post-60s, the arena. Let me give you a little image of what these ways of looking at society and environment were. And incidentally, I have to say, these pictures were done by my late husband, Bertram Broberg. So the idea of the world as an organic whole was that human settlements sort of nestle harmoniously within physical environments, and their scale is such that they cultivate community. In geography, we used this perspective for studies of sense of place, region, geopolitics, livelihoods, and resources. It's based, as I said, on a coherence theory of truth. That is, that the world consists of fragments that progressively congeal into nexuses, and then through dialectical process and contradictions, they wind up as an organic whole. And that whole was already implicit in the fragments. It transcends and previous contradictions. It economizes and preserves original fragments. This was the worldview, let's see, go back there. This was a worldview that became particularly popular with both anarchists and imperialists. But it was used by empires and big nations to justify colonization. So then it became a kind of a hegemony. For example, Pax Britannica, an empire in which the sun will never set. When monopolies arise, monsters appear. So monsters need to be dealt with. So organicism was very, very, viciously attacked on the grounds of environmental determinism and imperialism. Sorry. Sorry. In its place came this worldview of mosaic. To see everything having a place, dispersed worldview. I'll say less and less because of my throat, okay? You read. This was the Hartsonian worldview. The idea was to get characters that would represent details on the ground. There was a transcendent formism which would see the patterns on the surface to be the product of what was going on underneath. And it wound up with, as I say, a kind of an atlas view of the world. No integration, but plenty information. What you wound up with this monopoly was kind of a layer cake. No cohesive. That too was a kind of an imaginary creature which needed to be dealt with. Pegasus arriving to slay the chimera. And in its place, a view of the world as a mechanical system. Now this was particularly in World War II time, because the formistic approach did not really help. In wartime, it worked for World War I, but it didn't work for World War II. So systems analysis began to appear in the early 40s, mid-40s, and the world as a mechanical system became popular. Here's an image of the mechanical worldview. And here are the areas where we used it: industrial marketing systems, hydrological systems, urbanization, and so on. Here's a mechanistic landscape that was built around the same time. And this will be familiar to many of us as well. We looked at time, cost, distance. So the environment became, again, it was still a kind of tabula rasa, but it was organized around nodes and networks, distance, time, and cost. In America, civilization was defined as something 10 miles from the railway. It was the limits of civilization. Now, this one was not attacked by any other kind of aggressive creature, but by the gentle voices of people like Ifutmon. And the turn of the 70s, which questioned all the certainties of the mechanistic worldview. In its place came this view of the world as an arena, an arena of spontaneous events, contextualism. This was applied to resources, to hazards, sense of place, perception particularly. Here's an arena landscape. And now I want to sort of draw it together and say each of these four worldviews sheds its own particular light on a range of subjects related to society and environment. There are strengths and limitations to each of them. If you look, for example, at the way organicism looked at the region, it was a cell within an overall organism. The mosaic saw it as a land use pattern, kind of landscape pattern. Mechanism saw it as a node within a network, and arena saw it as a playground, a place where things happened. The mistake that was made so often was to judge the results of research conducted in any one of these using the categories of another, and that is illegitimate. Because as I said at the outset, each of these world hypotheses, root metaphors, is anchored on a particular theory of truth and a particular implicit process. Now that became very popular among the people we interviewed. They were able to locate themselves and changes over time in this thing. So it is one potential approach to the problem of knowledge fragmentation. Now, applying this to societal interests more specifically, and just focusing on these identity, order, and niche, you can see that in the early part of the 20th century, organicism shed light on niche, for sure, but also on identity. Up to World War I, organicism was quite strong. The others were there in the background, but they weren't prominent. In 1922, when IGU was founded, and also League of Nations, geography was described as mapping. So the map came in as the central identity of geographers. And it shed light on identity, but it began to look more at order, the ordering, boundaries, etc. Very important during World War II. Order became the big issue in the post-war period, but now it was mechanism that was used to shed light on it. You know, how is the system functioning, rather than what form is the system pattern looking, and so on. And then in the what I call it post-discipline, we're not there yet, but arena came along then. Now, the big story of the 21st century regarding society and environment, and geography generally, is the move from modernism to the alleged certainties of the modernist period to the uncertainties of the postmodern. I could spend a lot of time on this, but I find a lot of the literature recently, which is heavily influenced by literary criticism, a lot of the literature in human geography is removing itself from responsibility about making any definitive statement about society and environment. And I find that to be quite worrisome, let's say. You're all familiar with this shift, but it's worrisome because, and it's ironic, because it comes at a time when there are very urgent environmental issues to be resolved, as we just heard in the previous lecture. It's coming at a time when we realize the enormous exponential transformation that's happened in society and environment. Population, energy, technology, mobility, and all the consequences of this for humanity. So Pegasus returns, and I think there is a message for geographers particularly. Get back out there in the field, map, measure, analyze. So we tried to do this in IGU, as Ron said last night, with our colleagues in these other international scientific organizations. One of the things we did while I was president was to get the geosciences people together, soil science, geology, and others, and we went several times, and we looked at issues that we all held to be important. The geographers taking the lead on urban, the geologists taking the lead on groundwater, the geophysicists on others. But we met and discussed these various things, because the important thing is, if you don't meet face to face and you're relying on just reading the other discipline's journal, you don't really reach the point of discussing mutual projects. We did discuss face to face, and one of the outcomes was this year of Planet Earth, which led to, among other things, the problem of how do you apply? How do you move from pure science to the applied? And I think we didn't solve this, but, well, sorry, this is a little bit out of place here. In around the same time is the return of interest of Alexander von Humboldt, and then from other sources, the idea of the story of the universe. It's coming mainly from now theology and history, nature and ecology, to the idea that we are not in a static Earth situation, we're in an evolving universe. J.R. Desjardins, The Journey of the Universe. This is extremely popular now in circles way beyond geography. What remains is this tension between the traditional, I would say, social engineering approach of applied science. Archimedes, give me a place to stand and I shall move the earth. Versus the gentler voice of a Petit Prince saying, we must care for the earth. So I think nurturing a sense of caring about the earth is the opposite of the social engineering approach. Both of them are out there for us to address. Now I'm going to draw to a conclusion and say, all right, down the decades, down the century, there have been monopoly voices, major voices, and counterpoint voices. And I think these counterpoint voices are the important ones. And I would like to symbolize them in this way. When some liberation song, emancipatory cry occurs. It's a kind of phoenix, usually not listened to when first expressed. It has to die and then be reborn. And this can be a reminder of something missing, you know, an evoking of something forgotten, or just a fresh idea that to be followed. Anyway, if this is accepted in society, another phase comes. There's a structuring of it. It's given a home, it's given a castle, and a flag. And good old, this is, I call Faust, Goethe's Faust, who has to keep building for the sake of humanity, because if he ever stops and says, "Verweile doch, du bist so schön," Mephisto is here, ready to take his soul. So thinking people say, how come we arrive with these structures when what we really needed was something else? I mean, this is like unions, universities, churches, academies, you know, the tension arises between the structure, which tries to maintain itself or expand, versus the original ethos. So if this tension becomes too serious, too sad, or too hurtful, thinking people take another step. They go to the waters of Helicon. Come on. Oh yes, Augenblick. Narcissus. To the pool of Helicon to consult the muses. But instead of consulting the muses, the vulgar version says, he tends to fall in love with his own self-image. But there are many versions of Narcissus which see him being called by Eros. Having seen the image in the pool, he realizes that he needs to get rid of the encrustations of the Faustian period, open his mind for the new phoenix. So this is the sequence that I have been thinking about vis-à-vis Western ideas on society and environment. And once I expressed these to a group of Dutch people, and it was an ecology group, and she said, "No, you've got it wrong. We have been in the Faustian period. We are emerging, and in this postmodern period, into a Narcissus mood. On the horizon is a phoenix." So this is my conclusion. We're emerging from a long shadow of Faustian structures. We're now in postmodern mood, critically reflecting on experience, and on the horizon a new phoenix beckons. And finally, as Prince Kropotkin said many moons ago, geography must teach us from our earliest childhood we are all brethren, whatever our nationality. It must show that each nationality brings its own precious building stone for the general development of the Commonwealth, and that only small parts of each nation are interested in maintaining national hatreds and jealousies. He was the original counterpoint voice. So thank you for your attention. I hope that this addresses something of interest to you.
Yes, thank you, Anne. I think the speech was really of interest for us. And many thanks to both of your inspiring talks, the sword-packed talks, Anne Buttimer and Professor Klaus Töpfer. I think your lectures gave us an excellent starting point for our discussions on society and environment that lie before us for the next 4 days at this conference. Also thanks to you, the audience, for your presence and your participation. I hope I will see you tomorrow, same time, same place, for our next keynote speeches. Tomorrow we will hear lectures on our key topic, urbanization and demographic change, by Martin Leith and Surinder Agrawal. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow again. Bye-bye.